Let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're going to South Africa. It's all thanks to this really cool travel newsletter I found. And get this, we're talking about African penguins. Those adorable little guys waddling around on Boulders Beach. It's going to be amazing.
Oh, Boulders Beach is definitely the place to see them. It's incredible. They're found all along the coast from Namibia to Port Elizabeth. Really shows how adaptable they are.
Yeah, it's amazing. The whole Western Cape region is known for its biodiversity. I mean, think about it. Table Mountain, the Cape Winelands, it's all right there.
It really is a beautiful area. But just a heads up if you're planning a trip, South Africa is a popular spot, so booking in advance is key, especially during those peak seasons.
Good advice. Oh, and speaking of those penguins, did you know they used to have a totally different nickname? The newsletter said they were called jackass penguins.
That's right, all because of their brain calls. They're pretty loud.
I can only imagine, a whole beach full of them. The newsletter also mentioned something about the Cape of Good Hope. Apparently, there's a common misconception about it.
Oh yeah, a lot of people think it's the southernmost point of Africa, or where the Atlantic and Indian Oceans meet, but actually that's Cape Agulhas, which is about 150 kilometers southeast.
Huh, interesting. So the Cape of Good Hope is more like a historical landmark then.
Exactly, it's got all that maritime history and stories surrounding it.
Before we move on, I have to tell you about this heartwarming story I read in the newsletter. Have you ever heard of Just Nuisance? He was this legendary naval dog from Simonstown.
Oh yes, how could I forget Just Nuisance? The Great Dane, who basically became part of the Navy.
That's him. He was so loved that they actually enlisted him in the Royal Navy, gave him a sailor's cap and a service number, even paid him in biscuits.
That's Simonstown for you. It's full of these charming stories. But it's also a place with a rich history, going way back as a naval base. You can still see that history in the buildings and the museums there.
Plus, you can spot whales, seals, and of course more penguins there. Speaking of penguins, I was reading that they are the only penguin species found on the entire African continent. What do you think that says about the ecosystem there?
Well, it tells you just how unique the conditions are in that region. These penguins have perfectly adapted to the warm waters and the coast. Their presence really highlights the delicate balance of that ecosystem.
It makes you appreciate those encounters on Boulders Beach even more, knowing they're truly special creatures. But the newsletter also mentions some of the threats they face, like habitat loss and climate change.
Yeah, unfortunately, those are very real concerns. Human activities, things like coastal development and overfishing, they're encroaching on the penguins' nesting grounds and taking away their food sources.
And then you add climate change on top of that. It's impacting the whole marine ecosystem, right?
Absolutely. Rising sea temperatures are affecting everything, including the penguins' prey.
It's a reminder that everything is connected and what we do has an impact.
That's why it's so important to support the conservation efforts out there. There are organizations working hard to protect these penguins and their habitat.
What kind of things are they doing?
Well, they're doing research to understand the penguins better. They're also working on conservation strategies and trying to raise awareness.
It's good to know that people are out there fighting for them.
It's a complex issue, but there is definitely hope, and we all have a part to play. Supporting sustainable tourism, reducing our carbon footprint, even just spreading the word, it can all contribute to a better future for these penguins.
This is what I love about these deep dives. We start with something like a travel newsletter and end up learning so much about a completely different topic.
It's all about exploring and connecting the dots.
Exactly. And we'll be back in just a moment to continue our South African adventure. Stay tuned for more fascinating insights from the sunny shores of South Africa.
We're back, still exploring South Africa. Those penguins are definitely stealing the show. But there's so much more to the Western Cape. The newsletter really highlights the amazing ecosystems in that area.
You're so right. It's not just a penguin party down there. We've got those iconic landscapes like Table Mountain and the Cape Winelands. It's a nature lover's paradise.
Table Mountain is something else. It's more than just a pretty view. It's a biodiversity hotspot. Over 2,200 plant species, can you believe that? Many of them are only found right there. It's like a little world of its own up there.
And the Cape Winelands. This newsletter makes it sound so idyllic. Rolling vineyards, charming towns, sunshine. I'm ready to book a wine tasting tour right now.
Me too. But it's important to remember responsible tourism, right? Even though the newsletter didn't mention it specifically, we need to be mindful of our impact.
Absolutely. Respecting the wildlife, minimizing our footprint, supporting local communities, it's all part of traveling sustainably.
Exactly. Now, going back to that story about Just Nuisance, the newsletter described him as a real local legend. Everyone in Simonstown loved him. But his story is about more than just a dog, wouldn't you say?
Oh, I totally agree. What do you think makes his story so special?
Well, he wasn't just someone's pet. He represented that connection between people and animals. This Great Dane roaming around, making friends with sailors, even getting an official naval rank. It really captures the spirit of that town.
It adds another dimension to Simon's Town. It's not just about history and scenery, it's those little moments that make a place memorable.
You got it. And speaking of memorable encounters, let's go back to the penguins for a minute. We've talked about their calls, their habitat, the threats they face. What about all the work being done to protect them?
I was just thinking about that. What kind of conservation efforts are happening?
Well, there are some amazing organizations out there dedicated to African penguins. They're working on things like habitat loss, they're working with those coastal communities, and advocating for responsible development.
That's great. But what about climate change? It seems like such a huge problem. How can they even address that?
You're right, climate change is a global issue. But these organizations are studying how it specifically affects penguin populations. And then they try to develop strategies to lessen those impacts.
So it's not just about protecting their immediate environment.
Mm.
It's also about tackling these bigger issues that threaten their survival in the long run.
That's the idea. And while all those efforts are encouraging, it's a good reminder that we all have a responsibility. Even small things like supporting sustainable businesses, reducing our own carbon footprint, even just talking about it, it can all make a difference.
You're right. It's about collective action and individual responsibility. We can't just wait for someone else to fix it.
And knowledge is power, right? The more we know about these penguins, their ecosystem, the challenges they face, the more we can do to make informed choices and speak up for them.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. We started with a simple travel newsletter and ended up on this incredible journey, not just about the beauty of South Africa, but about conservation and how interconnected our world really is.
Exactly. And there's still more to come. In our last segment, we'll take a closer look at how those African penguins have adapted to their environment. And we'll explore some of the latest research on their conservation.
We're back for our final look at South Africa. It's crazy to think that this all started with a travel newsletter.
It is pretty cool how one thing leads to another. But before we wrap up, we need to talk more about those African penguins. We've covered their habitat, the threats they face, but how did they end up as the only penguin species on the whole continent?
Yeah, that's always puzzled me. It doesn't seem like the ideal spot for penguins, with a warmer climate and all.
Well, it's all about that Benguela current. That cold current flows up the west coast of South Africa, and it creates the perfect environment for them. They've adapted to those warmer waters and coastal conditions.
So they found their own little niche, even though it seems unlikely.
Exactly. And it's not just about tolerating the warmer water. Their breeding habits are different too. They nest in burrows, unlike other penguins who prefer those rocky areas.
Burrows, huh? That's pretty unique.
It is. It's how they deal with the heat and protect their eggs from predators.
It's amazing how they've adapted to that specific environment. Speaking of which, what's the latest on the conservation efforts? We talked about the challenges, but is there any good news out there?
There is. The good news is those conservation efforts are actually working. Organizations are trying all sorts of things, from habitat restoration to creating artificial nest boxes.
So they're giving the penguins a helping hand.
Exactly. And they're using some pretty cool technology too, like tracking penguin movements and studying their behavior. All that data helps them develop better conservation strategies.
It sounds like they're really dedicated to protecting these penguins. This whole deep dive has been so insightful. From those sunny beaches at Boulders Beach to the fascinating world of penguin evolution and conservation.
It's been quite a journey, and it shows you how a simple travel newsletter can spark some serious exploration.
And a reminder that we all play a part in protecting our planet, whether it's supporting sustainable travel or making choices that lessen our impact on the environment.
Absolutely. So the next time you see a penguin, or even just hear about them, remember their journey and how connected we all are.
This has been an amazing deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep exploring and learning. Maybe even picture those little penguins waddling around, with their braying calls and all.